Good morning, everybody. I'm Zach Blanchard, and this is Political Brew. Joining me at this table this morning, Republican political strategist Garrett Mason and Democratic strategist Betsy Sweet. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
First this week, Democratic Congresswoman Shelley Pingree pressed the Army on how it handles mental health crises and firearms in its ranks, following a preliminary report by the commission investigating the deadly Lewiston shootings that pointed out the Army's failure to adequately address concerns about the gunman. Pingree questioned Sergeant Major Michael Welmer. Pingree specifically asked about what protocols are in place to prevent soldiers, including reservists like the Lewiston shooter, from having an axe and guns when they're experiencing a mental health crisis. Welmer admitted there is gray area in the reserves compared to active duty.
Bottom line, in the active component, it is a much simpler solution. It just is, in the spirit of being very, very candid with you, much simpler.
Do Reserve or National Guard commanders have the authority to confiscate a soldier's firearms?
Ma'am, I'll have to take that for the record for you.
Now, Betsy, members of Maine's delegation, of course, have requested a full review and investigation into the Army. Do you expect there to be any accountability here?
You know, I think it's really hard to marry accountability with what's happened and what happened in the reserve and what happened in where he was, and our stigma about mental health and our fear about treading on anyone's Second Amendment rights. I think that is it created the soup that was awful and that led to the tragedy. And I think we have to get much clearer about being really clear about people's mental health status and talk about it openly and talk about it with family members, talk about it with police, talk about it with the National Guard and Army. And I think we also have to say, look, this fear that's been created that any little movement towards safety is somehow some huge infringement on someone's Second Amendment rights, that all plays in here. And I think we have to tease this apart. We're going to have to look at all three of those components.
Garrett?
I actually agree with a lot of what Betsy just said. I applaud Congresswoman Pingree for asking those tough questions. There is a severe mental health crisis in the Army and in the military as a whole, especially regarding reenlistments and checking in on people's mental health as they reenlist for another term in the military. I think these questions need to be asked. You need to only look at what's going on at Maine in North Dakota, and there's other military bases across the country to see that there is a mental health crisis in our military. So I think she's on the right track, and I'm glad she asked the questions.
And as Betsy noted, there is that stigma around it, and it's continuing to have those conversations. Yep. So we'll see where that goes. Meantime, Texas's new immigration law has been blocked once again. A federal appeals court stopped a state law that would have allowed Texas police to essentially arrest people they suspected of illegally crossing the Texas-Mexico border. Now, this happened just after the U.S. Supreme Court allowed the law to go into effect. Garrett, the argument continues over whether Texas has overstepped its constitutional limits here with SB 4. What does that mean for you?
I mean, I think what we've seen with Texas is they're trying to do everything that they can to protect their citizens. I heard a story this week about an 18-year-old boy who was from Honduras and essentially was forced to pay a coyote to bring him to the United States because a gang was trying to get him to run drugs from Honduras to Texas. That's what we're dealing with. A lot of these people, they don't want to be in the situation that they're in, but you also have criminal gangs who are running on the border of Texas, and Governor Abbott and those in Texas and Arizona and New Mexico are doing everything that they can to stop this. So it's a difficult situation. The videos coming out from yesterday are unbelievable, and the Biden administration needs to unrepeal, if that's even a word, the executive orders that from the Trump administration. That's my opinion.
Betsy, this will no doubt be an issue come November. Why do you think that is specifically? Is it the drug issue that Garrett's talking about? Is it this overwhelming fear, overarching fear?
I think it's racism. And I think it's fear being stoked by political operatives instead of what's actually happening. I think we have failed to make the distinction between people who are coming for nefarious purposes and people who are coming because they're desperate and because they want the jobs and they want to participate in our low workforce, worker shortage economy, right? So I think we have not, we've tried to take I think both sides have tried to take a sledgehammer to this issue and not really say, okay, what are the legal pathways? What are the reasons that people don't have access to those legal pathways for years at a time? Who are the people who are coming, who are just drug runners, and how do we make sure we take care of those? And I think this idea of just like this big sledgehammer, I think it's fueled by making it a political football, and I think that political football is really trying to prey on people's fear adding to the fear-based political system that we have, and and looking at, I think it's racist, and I also think it's like trying to figure out who is the person that we can all point to who everyone can be afraid of. And I think that has created this muddy situation, difficult situation, horrific situation, as we saw last week, that we have not taken the time or gotten rid of all the political rhetoric to say, how do we actually fix this for this country, for the residents of Texas, but also for the desperate people whose conditions, some of which we've created or helped create, that cannot live. Imagine, I just always think about the mother who's with 3 kids, who was desperate enough to walk often thousands of miles with 3 children to get to what is the potential promise of a better place, knowing how difficult things are. So that person is a desperate person, and we need to look at that too.
On Friday, the United Nations Security Council failed to pass a U.S.-backed resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. This is Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in the Middle East this week. All eyes now are on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who told Senate Republicans he planned to press on with the war. The death toll in Gaza is now over 30,000.
Negotiators continue to work. The gaps are narrowing, and we're continuing to push for an agreement in Doha.
But Betsy, obviously no agreement has been reached on the Security Council. You had China and Russia vetoing that resolution. What gives, I guess?
I'm horrified by it. The only thing that's helpful is Blinken saying the gaps are narrowing. We can only hope that that's true. The level of human suffering and the hostages that still remain, I mean, those 2 things are just huge, and to just somehow that we can't get past this for, again, geopolitical politics that are actually ignoring babies being born in the dirt and dying 2 days later. I mean, there are such humanitarian, horrific situations that we are just kind of sweeping under the rug in names of this geopolitical football thing that's going on. It is horrifying.
Garrett, what's it going to take?
Well, I think one thing that it could take is for Egypt to open their borders and accept some Palestinian refugees. I think that's one thing that they could do, but right now they're in the middle of building a 3rd wall to keep Palestinian refugees from coming out. So I think that there's a huge piece of that could happen that would alleviate some of this pressure. I also think that we need to remind ourselves that the governing body of the Palestinian Authority is Hamas. They're a terrorist organization. So Prime Minister Netanyahu is in a situation where he is negotiating with a terrorist organization because they are the body political of that of the Palestinian state. So I don't think any of us want atrocities to happen over there. I've been there multiple times. I have people on both sides of the fence in both Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel. It breaks my heart to see what they're going through. But this is a problem that Hamas started. And unfortunately, the Prime Minister is in an untenable position. I hope we can get something done.
Well, Hamas started it with what happened in Israel, but this has been, I don't think this is just a Palestinian issue that they've created. I mean, the whole Israeli occupying of Gaza, I mean, this has been a decades-long thing that has been created, and I think to just look at the last 6 months is not going to solve the problem.
Well, and I think we'd have to look at the past 2,000 years
to
get to that.
Yeah,
so I mean, I think that's a longer podcast version of this show that we could talk about, but
which we're happy to do.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
All right. We're going to leave it there and take a quick break. The Morning Report is back right after this. Good morning, everybody. I'm Zach Blanchard, and this is Political Brew. Joining me at the table this morning, Republican political strategist Garrett Mason and Democratic strategist Betsy Sweet. Thanks so much for being here. Happy Maine Maple Sunday.
Yes, absolutely.
Spring, maple syrup.
Yeah, good feeling.
Snow, finally.
Yeah, right.
All of it, right? All right, first this week, the debate continues in Augusta over gun legislation. Lawmakers discussing a slate of 4 bills, including legislation for waiting periods and voluntary waivers on gun sales, and a measure that would prevent forfeited guns from being resold. In addition, the governor's bill, an act to strengthen public safety by improving Maine's firearm laws and mental health system, would prevent people under an extreme risk order from accessing guns, something gun advocates in the state say they just won't get behind.
We are not going to criticize the governor. We appreciate what she's doing, although we don't support 100% of what's in her bill. There are some good things in there too.
Now, Garrett, what are those good things?
Well, I think, Dave Trahan, longtime legislator, longtime lobbyist, and I think that he hits the nail on the head. We're going to have this conversation. We're going to do this. But, the Sportsman Alliance saying, and a few other gun rights groups saying, yeah, let's talk about this. There's some things that we can get behind, but there might be some things that we can't get behind. I think that's a very reasonable response to what's being being put forward. Well, I think some folks are maybe a little upset about a waiting period. I mean, we have an element of that in in federal law. You have to fill out an application, you have to pass a background check if you're buying a new firearm. I think that may be one thing, and I think there's some elements of these bills that have been rejected at the polls, and there's always a reticence for that. For the legislature to go back on that. I think that's diminishing and weighing in some situations now. But I think that that clip that we just heard is a very reasonable response to these hearings.
And Betsy, I want to be clear. You've been strongly advocating for some of this legislation
for 40 years.
Has anything changed in the dynamic of the conversations, though, since Lewiston?
Yes, I think everyone's saying we have to look at this, and I think one of the mistakes that's being made, or one of the mistakes being made, is that people are looking at we're only going to change the things that would have affected the Robert Card situation. What Robert Card situation, the Lewiston tragedy showed us is how weak our gun safety laws are overall. And so we're looking at a bigger response. And I think there's more interest now and willingness to look at what those loopholes are, including a waiting period and how it affects suicide, looking at the holes in universal background checks that are big enough to throw a hog through. So, I think that's some of the things that we're looking at now.
Staying on this topic, House Republicans facing some criticism for using the initial report by the commission investigating the Lewiston shootings as justification to not support gun reform.
Unfortunately, some folks are using a horrific tragedy to try to justify a political agenda, and this commission does not suggest that that is the right thing to do at this point in time.
Betsy, do they have a point here?
No. No, not at all. It's not a political conversation. This is looking at our F grade that we get in Maine for gun safety legislation. And we want to prevent not the exact thing that happened with Robert Card, but the exact things, the general things that we know are going to happen. We used to say it'll never happen here. It happened here. It will happen again. And we need to look at what can we do. So to look at this report and say, oh, well, it was nothing. And one of the things the report said was that the police didn't do their job or the sheriffs didn't do their job. It's because the yellow flag law is so cumbersome and so difficult that is one of the reasons they haven't used it. And so I think if we don't look at that, that's a huge blind spot that's overtaken by political will of the Republicans, and that we must look at to actually do something that's going to keep Maine kids and Maine families safe.
Garrett, are they right that this is just political?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that need to be looked at a little differently. I disagree with some of the framing that Betsy gave over, but that's what we're here for. I think one of the things we have to look back on is the yellow flag law that was put into place was sponsored by Senator Lisa Kime, a Republican. That bill was put forward by a Republican, signed by a Democrat governor, and what that report did say is that if the yellow flag law was followed, we may have not had the tragedy that we had in Lewiston. So I don't think it's Republican inaction. I think it's Democrat flailing of whatever the issue du jour is on gun legislation. Let's make sure the yellow flag law worked, because we now have empirical evidence from a Maine-based Democrat-appointed commission that this could have made a difference if it was followed.
Meantime, House Democrats are facing some backlash for meeting with members of an ATF official privately this week. This was the headline in the Portland Press Herald, saying Democratic state lawmakers meet in private with a federal firearms regulator to discuss existing rules in preparation for a key committee meeting. Republicans criticize the move, pass up an offer to do the same, and say the discussion should have been public. Garrett, the ATF was the one that requested this meeting be in private, but were they in the wrong?
The ATF?
Democrats, I think, in this case, is what Republicans
I don't.
are saying.
I actually, I think that it was completely appropriate, and I think the Republicans should have taken them up on their offer. Listen, this goes to the heart of how legislative action is done in Augusta. You have to have caucus opportunity to speak, with folks like the ATF, and there's a variety of other groups that will come in from the federal government and offer information. So I disagree. I think that the Democrats were fully within their rights to have that caucus. I also think the Republicans should have taken them up on it. And if they start to bring this forward as some sort of violation of open speech and sunset law, I think it would do real damage to the process. So I agree.
And they already are.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
actually agree with Garrett. I think, they were offered the opportunity. The ATF has its own security reasons for doing it doing it not in public. And so I think it was a mistake to say, no, we're not interested in more information.
On to the next topic, a big roadblock for the effort to get more EVs in Maine. The state's Board of Environmental Protection rejecting a program that would have required more than 50% of vehicles sold in the state to be EV or hybrid by 2028. Garrett, right move or wrong move here?
Oh, right move. I mean, listen, I think, whenever those rules would have delegated a lot of what Maine does to the state of California. So I have some issues with that. What's good for California is not necessarily good for Maine. But I think that manufacturers are moving towards electrification anyways. I think there's going to be a move towards electrification. It makes sense for some people, especially those who have shorter commutes. But to enforce this on the population at large, I don't think it makes sense. And, what's not being talked about is some of the heavy truck laws that they wanted to pass. That would affect construction in a huge way. And it's not realistic to push that for 2027 or 2030, depending on the set of rules. So the right move was made here.
Betsy, right move or wrong move?
I think it's a disappointing move. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I think at some point we're going to have to get real about climate change. I mean, we've just suffered 2 of the worst storms Maine has ever seen. The sense of urgency around climate change is here. The sense of need around climate change is here. And I don't know how we close that gap. And personal transportation and the trucking industry and the freight industry on our roads is a huge part of the problem. And so I don't know when we get serious about this and when we're going to have to say we are going to have to make lifestyle choices and do things that are different and not comfortable and not just tiny little steps. We're going to have to take big things if we're going to actually address climate change.
All right, national politics, more primaries held this week, but a Trump-Biden rematch is pretty much a done deal. Former President Donald Trump has signaled he would support a national 15-week abortion ban. During a radio interview, he stated that 15 weeks seemed to be what most Americans agree on. Betsy, I'm not sure there is any agreement on this, though.
This is a fascinating thing to me that he has chosen this. I don't know why the Republicans keep going to this as a political issue when I think most Americans believe it should not be a political issue. It should be between a person and their doctor and her family. And it's a loser for them. I mean, every abortion amendment, every abortion referendum that's been held, they have lost big time. So I'm not sure why he is putting this out politically for him, if he thinks that's a winner for him. I think it's put out politically to re-energize his base. I think it's to get people believing, now I'm the guy, so I'm going to re-energize my base. And I think that's why he floated it. And we have to remember that Trump was pro-choice until he entered politics.
Garrett?
I think what we're seeing right now is what happened when Roe was decided many, many years ago was it stopped a national conversation on abortion. And most other countries had that debate during that time, and most of them settled around 20 weeks. That's what most of Europe does now. And now what we're seeing is a very extreme conversation about where does America go on this.
And I think fundamentally the problem is who should decide? I totally respect how you feel about it. I know you respect how I feel about it. Who decides? It sure shouldn't be government. And I don't think we should put it out to referendum either, although it will help us politically.
Finally, winners or losers, and we're not talking about March Madness here, but Betsy, you're up first.
For Kentucky.
Yeah.
So my winner of the week is Maine Maple Sunday and all the people who do make that happen. So I hope everyone gets out there in the snow and has some good maple syrup on pancakes and ice cream. And my loser of the week, I am going to wax philosophic because I think in today's brew, we've talked about so many of these key issues that are important to people that have been made into political footballs that keep us from being actually looking at the complexities and being able to talk about those complexities in a rational, calm way and to fix the problems that actually face Mainers and people in this country.
Garrett, that's very fair. Okay, so my winner and loser this week is Maine people. We won because we got through winter and spring is finally here. We're losing because we don't know if it's going to be 2 inches or 18 inches of snow this weekend, but we're going to find by the time this airs. So,
all right. Garrett Mason, Betsy Sweet, thank you both. That's going to do it for this week's Political Brew. And Morning Report is back right after this.